Okay, let's unpack this. There's been, well, an undeniable buzz around one of the highest profile cases in recent memory.
Absolutely huge.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into the recent verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs trial. Our mission here is really to cut through all the noise you've probably seen online.
Hmm.
We want to examine the actual events that unfold in the courtroom, delve into the intricate legal aspects, and explore the often surprising public reactions.
Yeah.
What emerges, I think, beyond the headlines is this fascinating look into how public perception can just starkly diverge from courtroom reality, and how legal strategy and, frankly, human bias truly shape outcomes.
It really is a prime example of how the narrative can evolve both inside and outside the courtroom. We're not just dissecting legal decision here. We're seeing how information, speculation, human emotion played out in real time,
Right.
influencing everything from jury dynamics right through to public opinion.
That narrative evolution is absolutely key. And to truly understand it, I think we have to go back to those intense jury deliberation days. Can you sort of paint a clearer picture of what that atmosphere was like, especially for Diddy and his family and, what was happening behind those closed jury doors?
Well, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation, definitely. On the first day of deliberation, a truly puzzling handwritten note came from the jury foreman.
Okay.
It stated, "Juror number 25 cannot follow instructions," just like that. And this immediately threw the courtroom into a state of bewilderment.
Wow. That note about juror #25. That's certainly intriguing. From your vantage point, what were the immediate theories or concerns circulating about what cannot follow instructions might actually mean in a high-stakes trial like this one?
Well, the initial speculation among the press and public just went into overdrive. Was it a comprehension issue, maybe? Especially with the complexity of some legal terms?
Sure, legal English can be tough.
Exactly. People were digging into the juror's background. But then came the surprising discovery. Juror #25 was actually a PhD student and a scientist.
Oh, so not a comprehension issue then.
Right. That instantly dispelled those theories about a lack of understanding. So the speculation shifted. Was it a health issue? Perhaps. Or maybe just an unwillingness to follow the instructions for some unknown reason. When you're in the dark like that, these small snippets, they really fuel the rumor mill.
Hmm. And the jury continued to send in notes, right, giving us more clues as to what they were focusing on.
They did. They specifically asked for the definition of drug distribution, which was interesting. And they requested transcripts of Cassie Ventura's testimony related to two key incidents: the Intercontinental Hotel and the Cannes Film Festival.
Okay, so really zeroing in.
Yeah, this indicated they were really drilling down into specific allegations. And then there was an interim outcome. On the evening of the second day, a note confirmed a partial verdict on 4 of the 5 counts.
But not all of them.
No. However, they were deadlocked on count 1, the major RICO charge. The Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. That's a serious federal charge, often associated with organized crime.
Right, the big one.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So everyone anticipated delays, thinking the verdict for that final count wouldn't come until maybe the following week.
So the tension leading up to that final verdict must have been just immense. What was the atmosphere like in the courtroom, particularly for Diddy and his family, during this period of uncertainty?
Oh, it was palpable. You could feel it. Diddy and his family were visibly stressed. I mean, looking almost on the verge of a breakdown, constantly comforting each other. There was even some speculation about whether they knew something the public didn't, perhaps seeing signs of an amiss situation before anyone else did.
Interesting.
Then, the very next morning, quite unexpectedly, at 9:52 a.m., a new note arrived.
We have reached a verdict on all counts.
Wow, okay, sooner than expected.
Much sooner. The courtroom just braced itself for the final revelation. And then the moment everyone was waiting for arrived. What was it like as the jury foreman began to read the verdicts? Take us there.
Okay, so the foreman began to read. For count 1, that RHO charge they were previously deadlocked on, the verdict was not guilty.
Not guilty after being deadlocked.
Not guilty. There was this audible gasp in the courtroom. It was small but distinct in the silent room. Quite a turn considering where they were just the day before.
Wow, okay. And what about the other charges? How did the courtroom react as the remaining verdicts were read?
So next came count 2, sex trafficking regarding Cassie Ventura. Again, not guilty.
Another major one.
Yes. At this, some family members let out an audible yes. It wasn't screaming, but it was a clear affirmation, And smiles started to spread on the defense side.
I understand Diddy seemed hesitant at first, but then started to, break out into full smiles as the verdicts kept going his way.
That's right. Then for count 3, transportation for purposes of prostitution related to Cassie Ventura, the verdict was guilty. But interestingly, there was no visible reaction from his side on that one.
Huh.
And you're right about his reaction building. For count 4, sex trafficking for Jane, it was not guilty. And this is where Diddy really broke into full smiles. I mean, these were the 3 major charges: Arco, Cassie sex trafficking, and Jane sex trafficking.
And he was found not guilty on all of them.
All 3.
And finally, count 5, transportation for prostitution for Jane, was also guilty. So yeah, a clear win for the defense on the major charges, but guilty on the 2 lesser counts. What were the immediate emotional reactions in the courtroom among the team, the jury?
Well, there was definitely an emotional release on the defense side. Diddy was seen nodding, kind of empathetically at the jurors, even mouthing thank you to them.
And the juror?
They remained totally stone-faced, avoiding eye contact. His attorney, Mark Agnifilo, looked very pleased, and Kenny Garagos' daughter, was seen crying tears of joy. The defense attorneys even hugged each other.
So jubilation on one side, stoicism on the other.
Pretty much. But inside the courtroom, there was this almost eerie, kind of unexplainable sensation. People described it as a weird energy that gave many goosebumps, even among those with, vastly different reactions to the verdict. It felt as though the collective tension of months had just crystallized into that one single breath.
I can almost feel that. So once the jurors were dismissed, what was the immediate legal aftermath? What happened regarding Diddy's potential release?
Right. Defense attorney Mark Agnifilo immediately stood up and made an application for Diddy's release on bond. His argument was basically, look, he's no longer charged with major felonies like sex trafficking or racketeering.
Makes sense.
And he added that his chartered plane was waiting, so he couldn't access it anyway. He proposed $1 million bond and some other conditions.
Okay. And how did the prosecution respond to that request?
Oh, the government aggressively opposed this, vehemently. They requested Diddy remain in jail pre-sentencing.
Really? Even after the acquittals on the major charges?
Yes. And they stated they would pursue maximum sentences for the 2 prostitution charges he was found guilty on. That's 10 years each, totaling 20 years.
20 years potential for those 2 counts. Wow. So what does this all mean for what happens next? We also heard that both Cassie Ventura and Dante Nash submitted letters to the judge. What was the gist of those letters, and how might they factor into the judge's decision?
Right. Both Ventura and Nash expressed concerns for their safety if Diddy were to be released on bail. Serious concerns. The judge acknowledged receiving them and stated he would take all these factors, the verdict, the government's arguments, the defense's arguments, these letters into consideration before making a decision on bond and, eventually, the future sentencing.
So, still a lot hanging in the balance there. Now, let's maybe delve into why this verdict played out the way it did. Many observers pointed to the perceived effectiveness of Diddy's defense team. What made them seem so successful in there?
Yeah, they were widely described as incredibly charismatic, just really skilled at controlling the narrative, and ultimately winning the jury over. Their strategy was often referred to as a kind of love story defense, presented very casually.
A love story defense. And I heard they even used arguments that sounded like they were from decades ago, like the government doesn't belong in the bedroom.
Exactly that. And Brian Steele, who represented him, is now being called the RICO remover because of his track record. He has quite the reputation.
The RICO remover. Okay. So how did the prosecution's approach compare? Why did they seem to struggle?
Well, in contrast, the prosecution faced, let's say, perceived challenges. Their questioning of crucial witnesses like Cassie and Jane was described by courtroom observers as flat and monotoned.
Really? Even with that kind of testimony?
Yeah. While the testimony itself was incredibly emotional on paper, the delivery in the courtroom may not have been emotionally moving enough for the jury. That's the speculation, anyway.
That's fascinating how delivery can impact things so much. And the jury composition itself became a significant talking point, didn't it? What were the observations made about the jury, and what sort of speculation did that lead to?
It did. Observers noted that the jury skewed a little bit older, and perhaps more significantly, it was 8 men out of 12 jurors.
8 men out of 12.
Right. And this led to speculation, that maybe emotion always wins in what some people might unfairly simplify as he said, she said situations, even if the evidence presented was obviously more complex than that. But it raises an important question, right, about how we as a society process information about victims and maybe apply our own biases, consciously or not.
That's a really crucial point. The trial definitely seemed to underscore this societal concept of a perfect victim. And maybe the difficulty people have, accepting that victims can be multifaceted people. Can you give us an example of how this played out in the perception of the trial?
Yeah, for instance, online you saw people debating Jane's age, she's 35, a mother, and her expressed desire for a Chanel bag. They were contrasting it with Cassie's situation, who was much younger, 18, and involved in a relationship with documented violence.
Right, setting up this sort of comparison.
Exactly. Yet ultimately it seems the jurors believed Cassie consented to what were termed freak-offs, specific sexual acts mentioned in the trial, despite her testimony about the coercive elements of the relationship.
Which really speaks to that complexity of consent under duress.
Precisely. And that takes us right into the widespread online speculation that accompanied this trial, particularly those rumors about Diddy buying off jurors, especially when the jury was deadlocked on the RICO charge. What do the sources say about those allegations?
Were they credible at all?
Well, these allegations are widely considered baseless and highly unlikely by those who actually followed the proceedings closely inside the court.
Right. Which, while maybe baseless, it really reflects a sort of depressing lack of faith in our justice system sometimes, doesn't it? That people jump to that conclusion.
It absolutely does. And, beyond the courtroom, the public spectacle was just as intense, maybe even more chaotic.
Oh, it was pure mayhem outside the courthouse, from what I read. Crowds were apparently split into these fervent pro-Diddy and anti-Diddy camps.
Total division.
You had people chanting "Free Puff," wearing "Frio is not a Rico" t-shirts. I even read about a famous TikToker having baby oil rubbed on him. It sounds surreal.
It was quite a scene, and apparently fights were breaking out. Kind of ironically, even between Diddy supporters themselves, arguing over who was there every day showing support and who wasn't.
Wow, just chaos.
Yeah.
And online, the discourse must have been all over the place.
Oh, completely. Equally diverse and often contradictory. You had some people quick to claim they knew he'd be innocent, pushing narratives about attempts to take down a successful black man.
Uh-huh.
Then you had others citing the CNN video evidence, demanding his computers be searched, calling the courtroom standing ovation. Some gave him criminal.
Yeah, I saw a lot of that online.
Mhm.
Many comments reflected this really cynical sentiment that the trial proves you can do anything if you have money, and others sarcastically responding like, "Guess I'm too broke to break the law."
That cynicism was definitely present. And then there were the, frankly, deeply concerning comments that the verdict would make Diddy feel untouchable now
Right?
and potentially discourage future victims from ever coming forward. The debates just raged on about whether Cassie, liked and wanted to participate in the freak-offs versus the undeniable role of coercion out of fear due to the alleged domestic violence.
It really showed the polarized views, didn't it? Reflecting this broad societal disagreement on these incredibly complex issues.
Absolutely.
Well, this deep dive into the Sean Diddy Combs trial verdict has been quite a journey, really. We've seen the surprising not guilty verdicts on the major charges, the complex jury dynamics, and this intense legal battle that actually continues over his release and sentencing for those two minor charges.
Indeed. It's a case that has sparked immense debate and analysis, both inside and outside the courtroom. And it reveals so much about our justice system and, well, public discourse today.
So when you boil it all down, what does this deep dive truly reveal? I think it's a really profound reminder of the justice system's inherent complexities, where the power of narrative, maybe, can sometimes eclipse raw evidence.
It seems that way sometimes.
And where society's evolving understanding of concepts like consent and victimhood are put to the ultimate test right out there in the public eye.
Exactly. I think this case really underscores that the real story isn't just the verdict itself, but the ongoing tension between legal facts, human perception, and societal expectations. It leaves us, and you listening, to consider how these elements interact to shape justice, and how we, as a society, continue to grapple with such intricate and often uncomfortable dynamics.